The test we're going to be looking at here is an injector balance test. We're going to go through and we're going to check the individual injectors to make sure that they can flow the same amount of fuel. In order for the engine to run balanced, each cylinder has to be getting a comparable amount of fuel depending upon the operating range of the engine. The setup we have here is going to allow us to fire each individual cylinder and measure how much the fuel pressure drops when the injector fires. So we've got it set up. I've got a fuel pressure gauge and I've got a fuel injector tester. I've got it set up for this particular vehicle. We're looking carefully, we can see that we've got different settings here. On one side we can do a balance test where we can do the flow rate of the injector. On the other side we can check the actual coil that creates the magnet that opens and closes the injector. We're going to be looking at the balance test, and I've got this set to the 0.5 amp to 2.5 amp setting, which is going to be typical for a port fuel injection engine. See, the 4 amp setting, that's going to be more common on our really old throttle body injection systems, which we really don't see a whole lot of them around anymore, thankfully. So we're going to take and we're going to run this. What we're going to do is we're going to start off by pressurizing the fuel system. When we pressurize the fuel system, we're going to note the pressure reading on the gauge. Then we're going to use the injection tester to fire the injector, and you'll hear the injector actually clicking open and closed. It'll happen for a set period of time, and we're going to watch the fuel pressure and see how the fuel pressure changes as the injector is firing. Obviously, the fuel pressure should drop. We're going to note the amount of change that occurs from firing the injector. Then we're going to set up and we're going to test each individual injector to make sure that they have a comparable drop in pressure. Looking at the setup, all this really is just controlling battery voltage to the injector, cycling the injector on and off. You don't want to send continuous voltage to the injector because it'll damage, it'll overheat the injector. So this equipment just cycles the injector on and off. You can see that I've got adapters set up here. I've got jumper wires coming in off the injector, going to the injector tester. If I zoom in here, we can see that injector down inside. And I've got the wires tapped into that injector, coming out, following those wires to our injector tester. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to energize the fuel pump so that we can get pressure at the fuel gauge. Alright, so looking at my gauge here, I'm going to go when I've got about 40 psi. I'm going to fire this injector tester, and we see that it stopped at about 32 psi. So all I did was push the button on the injector tester. It fired off the injector. You could hear it cycling, and that allowed the fuel pressure to drop. So we went from 40 psi to about 32 psi. So we know what our injector pressure drop is. We'll take and we'll move over to the next injector, redo the test, and what we want to do is compare that pressure drop from one cylinder to the other, and they should be equal.